Not every warrior carries a sword in the right hand. Some deliver nations with what the world calls a weakness. In the shadows of oppression, when hope seemed all but lost, God raised a man, unexpected, underestimated, and unshakable. This is not just the tale of a man with a dagger. This is the story of how God used the unlikely to achieve the impossible. This is the story of Ehud, God's left-handed warrior. Darkness had fallen, not just over the land, but over the hearts of the people. Israel had turned away once more. They abandoned the God who had delivered them from Egypt, the God who split the sea, who rained manna from heaven, who gave them victory in the wilderness. Now they chased idols. They mixed truth with lies, holiness with compromise, and like a shadow creeping across the desert floor, judgment followed. God allowed a king to rise, Eglon of Moab, cruel, ruthless, hungry for power. He joined forces with the Ammonites and the Amalekites, and together they swept into Israel like a storm without mercy. Cities fell, crops were taken, sons were turned into slaves, and for 18 long years, Israel bowed under the weight of their own rebellion. Moab didn't just rule with weapons, they ruled with humiliation. Every year, the Israelites had to bring tribute, wealth, grain, gold, gifts to a foreign king. It was a reminder that their freedom was gone, a reminder that they were no longer their own. The promised land had become a prison. But in their suffering, something stirred. When the weight became too much to bear, when pride gave way to pain, they remembered the God they had forgotten. And once again, they cried out. The cry of the broken never goes unheard by heaven. God listened, not because they were strong, but because they finally remembered who their strength came from. And so, God raised a man, not a warrior with a polished sword, not a general with an army, but a quiet man, a left-handed man named Ehud from the tribe of Benjamin. Benjamin, ironically, it means son of the right hand. Yet here was Ehud, a man whose strength came from the left, in a culture where right-handedness symbolized power, order, and honor. Being left-handed was overlooked, uncommon, even despised, but what the world dismissed, God designed, because left-handedness would be his weapon. God doesn't need what's expected, he uses what's unexpected, because that's where the glory can't be stolen. Ehud didn't stand out in a crowd. He wasn't famous, he wasn't feared, but God gave him purpose hidden beneath the ordinary. He was chosen to carry the tribute to King Eglon. But beneath his clothes, strapped to his right thigh, was a double-edged dagger, short, silent, and lethal. This wasn't just an offering, it was an assignment. Because when the world least expected it, God would bring freedom through a left hand. The halls of the palace were lavish but oppressive, a kingdom built on stolen strength, a throne bloated with arrogance, and there sat King Eglon, a man known not just for power, but for excess. His size a symbol of overindulgence, of a ruler who devoured the labor of the weak. Ehud entered with respect, eyes lowered, voice calm, no sword drawn, no threat perceived, only a quiet Israelite delivering what Moab demanded. He handed over the tribute, wealth, grain, offerings gathered under duress, an act that seemed to scream submission, but it was strategy. Ehud dismissed his men. They returned home, unaware of what would unfold. Then, alone, he passed the stone idols near Gilgal, symbols of the very false gods that held Israel captive. He stopped. Something inside burned. He turned back, not to flee, but to finish. He stood once more before the king. No guards, no crowd. "Your Majesty, I have a secret message for you." Those words weren't just a lure, they were a key, because divine deliverance sometimes looks like a whisper before it becomes a war cry. And Eglon, curious, greedy for anything that fed his ego, leaned forward, completely unaware. He had just opened the door to his own judgment. The chamber was quiet. Too quiet. The air, thick with the scent of incense and sweat, hung heavy over the moment. Eglon dismissed his guards, trusting too much in his power, underestimating the quiet man before him. Ehud stood still, watching, waiting, a storm cloaked in calm. Then he stepped closer and said, "I have a message from God for you." And in that single breath, he delivered not a letter but judgment. Eglon rose from his seat, sluggish, curious, and in a flash of divine precision, Ehud reached with his left hand, where no one would expect danger. From his right thigh he drew the hidden dagger and struck. The blade sank deep, so deep, the handle disappeared into the folds of the king's flesh. Even the fat closed over it. No shout, no alarm, just silence. The room of power became a tomb of pride. Ehud didn't tremble. He didn't hesitate, because when God ordains a moment, it doesn't miss. He left the body, still and slumped, slipping out, unnoticed, mission complete. But the battle was just beginning. No footsteps followed. No shouts were heard. Ehud, steady and calm, walked out of the chamber like nothing had happened. He closed the doors behind him, softly, silently. Then locked them. Every click of the bolt was a blow against oppression. Each step away was a step toward Israel's freedom. Inside, the king lay cold and lifeless, but outside, the palace remained unaware. The guards returned. They stood at the door, but the silence inside deceived them. "He must be relieving himself," they said, embarrassed to interrupt their king. They waited and waited. Too long. By the time they realized the truth, Ehud was gone, vanished into the hills, his shadow swallowed by the land. He had done what no soldier could, slipped into the heart of the enemy's stronghold and struck it down from the inside. This wasn't just strategy. It was divine choreography. God had made a way through a left-handed man with a hidden blade and perfect timing. Through the hills of Ephraim, Ehud ran, not from fear, but with fire in his chest. He passed the carved idols, the false gods of a fallen kingdom. They stood silent, unable to stop what heaven had already started. When he reached Sirah, he climbed to the high ground and blew the trumpet. It wasn't just a call. It was a declaration, a warning, a war cry. The hills echoed with the sound of deliverance. Men poured out of hiding, farmers, shepherds, sons and fathers, not warriors by nature, but warriors by faith. Ehud raised his voice. "Follow me, for the Lord has given your enemies, the Moabites, into your hands." And they followed. Not because he was powerful, but because God was. Not because he looked like a leader, but because he was called to be one. He stood, not with a sword this time, but with confidence in God's promise. This was the rise of the unexpected, the beginning of a divine uprising. With the people behind him and God's word before him, Ehud moved swiftly. They seized the river crossings, cutting off every escape route. The Moabites, caught off guard, never saw it coming. 10,000 of their strongest fell, not one escaped. This wasn't just a military victory. It was a breaking of chains, a lifting of a heavy curse. And in that moment, Israel stood free. For the first time in years, they tasted peace, not man-made, but God-given. The battle was over. But the story wasn't about war. It was about freedom, about a nation brought to its knees and lifted by God's hand. Ehud faded into history, but his obedience left a mark. Israel entered a time of peace, not for a season, but for 80 quiet, God-ordained years. Sometimes deliverance doesn't come in expected ways. Sometimes it comes from a left-handed man with nothing but courage and faith. Because when God chooses you, your limitations don't matter. Your obedience does. The story of Ehud is a powerful reminder that God can use anyone, no matter how unexpected, to accomplish his purposes. With boldness and faith, Ehud defeated Israel's oppressor, showing that no challenge is too great when God is at work. This story teaches us about courage in the face of adversity, trusting God's timing, and believing that he can use even the most unlikely people for his plans. Just as Ehud brought deliverance to Israel, we too can step forward in faith, knowing that God equips those who trust in him. If this message inspired you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more biblical stories of faith and courage. Let us know in the comments. What's your biggest takeaway from Ehud's story?